everybody? I'm Richard Holder and welcome to the channel. As you can see, I'm at West Tech Performance. Before we get going, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff so you get notified when I do all of these videos. Let's talk about Pontiac 400s. We've got a 2-barrel intake. We've got a 4-barrel intake, and we have an aftermarket aluminum intake. The question with the Pontiac, do we really need to change the intake?
Time to check out the test motor.
All the good ones are gone, unless you need to go leaner. That you might have. So now, with Mr. Rotor,
So as it turns out, this thing has roller rockers on it, Scorpions, 1.5. What we're going to do, we've got our oil line hooked up to the dyno. See, we've got our gauge here. We're going to spin this thing over, see if it has oil pressure, and if it does, then we're going to try to find out if we can get oil pressure or oil up to all the rockers. So you want to keep an eye on this gauge right here, and we're going to see if it moves. Oh yeah, that's good sign. There's some weird fluctuations. So we do have oil pressure. So we got 60 pounds under cranking, fluctuating a little bit, so you take a look at that. Now we're going to try to see if we can get oil up to all the rockers. Here, we got all of them on this row now. Everybody has oil. See how we're doing on this side? Oil here, 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 and here. So we're gonna do a little valve lash adjustment here. I just want to check them. I also want to get some oil up under the roller and the valve tip. So figure it out.
First up on the dyno was the Quadrajet.
So I cranked this thing over, just want to make sure that it had, fire and fuel to start it up, and the idle was really, really high, and I think I found out why. Check it out. I thought there was a vacuum leak or something, but there's not. It's even better. So if you take a look, I wanted to see if the throttle was open, but it didn't look like it in the primaries. That was all good. But if you look in the secondaries, look what I found. This was holding the throttles open. Yep, that's a bolt. Make sure to check your carburetor. Check that carburetor. Now, ideally, I would have started out with this Pontiac 400 with the smaller 2G carburetor and 2-barrel induction system, and then we would have stepped up, but that's not the way that we ran, so that's not the way I'm bringing it to you. We started things out with the Q-Jet, factory Q-Jet intake manifold and factory Quadrajet. The one thing that I didn't tell you about the buildup of this motor, or rather the assembly of this motor, because it was a little bit unknown to me. I didn't know what pistons are in it. We assume that it's a flat top piston with valve reliefs, and also this has the 6.2 heads on it, so 69 with small chamber, big valve. So it's a good set of cylinder heads. Again, factory Quadrajet intake manifold, factory Q-Jet, an HEI distributor that we limited the advance on. This thing ran best with about 30 to 31 degrees of timing. The other thing that's unknown about this motor is the camshaft. I'm assuming, given the way that it idles and stuff, it's some sort of stock cam or possibly a very small RV style camshaft. But let's jump right in and find out how well it did with the Quadrajet, that we could take a look at what happened when we upgraded the carburetor to a 750 quick fuel using an adapter. So run with the Quadrajet on the Quadrajet manifold. This 400 Pontiac with long tube headers produced 342.6 horsepower peak torque checked in at 412 foot-pounds of torque. You can see very torquey, making power early, making both peak power and torque early. A good indication that we have a fairly mild camshaft. Now let's find out how well this thing ran with the quick fuel. Okay, I ran this test just because the people that own this car or own this motor also had this quick fuel carburetor that they planned on running on it, so I wanted to show them how well it did. Now you guys get to argue, where are all my Quadrajet fans? You guys get to bicker back and forth and decide, was this really a good test or not? Because in order to put this quick fuel, the 750 quick fuel carburetor on there, we obviously had to use an adapter. And if you know anything about the adapters, it also doubles basically as a carb spacer, because to be able to put the 4150 on the Q-Jet style manifold, what we had to do is run an adapter, and the adapter adapts from either a Q-Jet to a 4150 manifold or a 4150 to a Q-Jet manifold, depending on which way we flip over the spacer. So this one was run with a spacer or an adapter, depending on what your point of view is. But we ran this 4150 or 4150 quick fuel carburetor, and actually I didn't do anything to it. We just ran it right out of the box. I didn't have to do any jetting. The jetting was like near perfect. It actually ran really, really good out of the box. And the interesting thing is, despite being a dramatically different carburetor and having to breathe through the adapter into the Quadrajet manifold, here is what happened. Basically nothing. You can see it made basically not only exactly the same power, but exactly the same power basically everywhere. So it's interesting that the two carburetors produce the same power, which tells us that the carburetors themselves weren't a restriction, and that both of the carburetors were working very well in terms of the air fuel that they were supplying. Remember, we're going to take a look at what happened. I did some adjustments on the Quadrajet metering rods and things to get it to do what it was doing here, and we're going to take a look at that. But in terms of the carburetors, both those carburetors made exactly the same power on this combo. Now let's take a look at the two-barrel. So right now I don't have a gasket for the two-barrel intake manifold, but I do have this instant gasket. Here's where things get interesting. You can see me hanging out up in the corner, and there's a reason I'm up there. I did not want to block the power output, the massive power output of the 2G two-barrel combination. And this is really interesting. If by interesting you seem to think that losing a lot of power is the way to go, the two-barrel is definitely your choice. So this was our Quadrajet combination. 342 horsepower, 0.6, and 412 foot-pounds of torque. But here's what happened when we put the two-barrel intake manifold and 2G carburetor on here. the power output dropped dramatically down to 255 horsepower. Now, I've never seen any sort of combination like this. I've never seen a 2-barrel versus a 4-barrel lose this kind of power. We've seen some pretty big power changes, and honestly, the only time I've tested 2-barrel versus 4-barrel, they've been on very, very mild applications that were making anywhere near, they weren't making close to 350 horsepower. They were making close to 250 horsepower. So the change between the 2-barrel and the 4-barrel was not that dramatic. We have seen some stuff like this when we run the 2-barrel, like restrictor class motors for circle track, and then you take the 2-barrel combination off, which is already an even better one. It's a 500 CFM 2-barrel. Take that off and put a 4-barrel on, and you still get good power gains. But here's the telling part about this, and the nice thing about the 2G, it actually provided a very good air-fuel curve. It was within a couple tenths of an air-fuel point of the 4-barrel, so we know that the air-fuel was good. It just had no airflow, and we know that because we monitored vacuum on this, and we saw around 1 inch of vacuum or so on the 4-barrel, but we saw more than 7 inches of vacuum on the 2-barrel. That tells you how restrictive in terms of airflow that 2-barrel was. So if you've got a 2-barrel Pontiac, by all means, put a 4-barrel. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what's the takeaway on this Pontiac 400 testing with the 2-barrel, the 4-barrel Quadrajet, and the aftermarket Quick Fuel 750 carburetor? Well, the takeaway is this. If you have a 2-barrel on any Pontiac, whether it's a 350 or a 326 or a 400 or 455, make sure that you upgrade to the 4-barrel. A lot of 2-barrel guys, erroneously so, will think that the 2-barrel is going to offer me better fuel economy. And there could be a point argued for that, but if you're running around at wide open throttle, you're going to use less fuel with the 2-barrel than you will with the 4-barrel, but only because you're making so much less power. That way it's delivering less fuel. But for cruise fuel economy, while you're cruising down the road trying to get good mileage, a Quadrajet will offer better fuel mileage than the 2-barrel will. Now, what about an aftermarket carburetor upgrade, going from the Quadrajet to like a 4150, like our Quick Fuel, as we showed no power there, and this isn't going to be a surprise to any of the Quadrajet guys. They know the Quadrajet works very well. There's lots of guys in class racing making lots and lots of power with them, so they offer good fuel economy and performance, so long live the Quadrajet. In part 2, we're going to check out a couple of things with the Quadrajet. I'm going to show you what happens when we tune this and how much power you can make with it. And then I'll also show you what happens when we upgrade to an aftermarket aluminum performance intake manifold. That's coming up in part 2, so make sure to check it out.